Oh, really?
New school and friends. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here with you and share my humble thoughts. At the very outset, let me quote Lenin. He once said, "It is more pleasant and useful to go through the experience of revolution than to write about it." For me, I am also having the same feeling. Though I am not writing about it, I am talking about it. And there is one more dilemma I am facing. I have to speak among such distinguished academics, and I have lost touch with academia for almost 20 years. I have been a revolutionary activist. I was underground for almost 10 years, more than 10 years, and now I have been overground only for the last 5 years. And ironically, I become the Prime Minister of the country. So I have slight trepidation to stand before you. My presentation could be very mundane because now I am in the business of practicing theory. So when I have to present about and talk about the theory of Marxism, relevance of Marxism, so I just have to go back to my student days of last 20 years and then talk about it. I don't know how relevant that would be. But still, I think this is a very interesting topic. I am very happy to talk about Marxism in USA. How many of you know when you apply for a visa to visit USA, they ask so many uncomfortable questions. Whether you have ever become a revolutionary, whether you have ever used the guns, whether you know how to use the guns, etc., etc. Even as a Prime Minister, I was interrogated and I had to answer. And now I am talking about Marxism and making about revolution. So I think I am very happy. Friends, I think this topic you have given to me today, relevance of Marxism in the 21st century and experiences in Nepal, I think I'll just talk in two parts. Firstly, I think I'll like to dwell upon the theoretical part of Marxism. What is Marxism, and I would say what is not Marxism, and whether it is at all relevant in the present day world. And the second part I would like to discuss what we have thought of Marxism and how we have tried to apply it in Nepal. You may disagree. I don't expect all of you to agree with me, because Marxism inculcates in us an attitude of criticality. Basic essence of Marxism, what Lenin once said, was to be critical and revolutionary. If you are not critical, you can't be a Marxist. And if you are not revolutionary, then only you can't be a Marxist. So to be a Marxist, you have to be both critical and revolutionary. So I would welcome your critical comments, and I will try to respond as much as I can. Now, starting with the relevance of Marxism, as you know, by the end of the 20th century, all the socialist states created on the philosophical base of Marxism were defeated. though there are still certain states who call them socialist and Marxist, there is a debate whether the policy they have been following is at all socialist and Marxist or not. In most of the states, led by the Soviet Union, who is founded on the basis of Marxism, they couldn't survive. By the end of 20th century, they were gone. And few states who have been surviving, we don't know how long they will survive. So the thinking arose in the 90s, the end of philosophy, end of history, end of ideology, etc., etc. But ironically, with the beginning of the 21st century, when there was economic crisis all over, then people thought, maybe Marxism is still alive. Maybe we'll have to go back to Marxism again. So the critical debate surfaced. And I see much of the literature coming out, especially from the Western countries, USA or the Western Europe, and very rich in content about the essence of Marxism. I think that Marxism is reviving again. And people like us, it's a matter of real pride and satisfaction that Marxism cannot die. It is still live and kicking. And my own expectation is Marxism will again rise from the ashes of the 20th century, and by the end of this century, it will again be the leading philosophy and ideology to guide the world. This is my belief. I may be wrong, but I think history will prove me right. Because I don't see any other alternative, any other philosophy which can describe in a scientific, holistic, objective manner the developments going on around us. So how do we explain the crisis going on? You see the gap between the rich and the poor, both within the particular country and among nations, is rising. And the conflicts, wars going on. I think we have more wars, more people have been killed since the Second World War. So how do we explain that? Because Marxism is a philosophy and science of class struggle. When you see all around class struggle or very strong struggle are going on, how do you explain that? I think there is no other theory which can explain the root causes of struggle, revolt, revolutions. Currently the so-called Arab Spring going on. How do you explain that? Is it just a question of democracy or the basic class contradiction inherent in those societies which are erupted as the democratic movement? Or elsewhere, anywhere. So why does the US or the big powers intervene in Iraq, Afghanistan and elsewhere? Is it just for democracy? Or there are some other hidden motive or any other reason? How do you explain it? I don't see any other philosophy or ideology which can explain it in a coherent and objective manner other than Marxism. So that's why I feel there is still relevance of Marxism. And now the question arises, what is Marxism and what is not Marxism? Though there are various interpretations, especially of the type of Marxism which was practiced in Soviet Union under the leadership of Stalin. Of course, there were certain distortions. Marxism was just codified and reduced into simple formulae, and the way that was applied was very mechanistic, and it was copied through the Third International in many parts of the world. And against that variety of Marxism as codified by Stalin, various other streams arose. I think even during the time of Lenin, people like Gramsci, and during Stalin's time, people like Trotsky, or even Mao, though basically supported Stalin, he had his own development of Marxism applied in China. And Marxism as applied in Cuba and elsewhere. They were also different. And Che Guevara, his Marxism was also much different from as applied in the Soviet Union. So that there are very strengths of Marxism. So though I belong to a stream of Marxism as developed by Mao, that's why our party is called the Unified Communist Party of Nepal Maoist. Basically, I subscribe to that very variant of Marxism as developed by Mao. But that doesn't mean we follow Maoism as a religion. Whatever Mao says is not religion for us. What Mao said, I would like to quote from Mao. What Mao said was, Marxism also has its birth, its development and its death. This may seem to be absurd, but since Marx said that all things which happen have their death, how can we say that this is not applicable to Marxism itself? To say that it won't die is metaphysics. Naturally, the death of Marxism means that something higher than Marxism will come to replace it. I fully agree with Mao. Marxism is a science. It itself developed in the 19th century to resolve the contradiction arising out of capitalism, which was developed in Western Europe. So the first Marxist project as applied was in the Paris Commune. The concept of Paris Commune was direct democracy of the masses. Though it couldn't survive more than 70 days. But it created history. And for almost 40 years there was no revolution. And in 1917, when there was revolution in Russia, Lenin creatively applied and developed Marxism. What Lenin did in Russia was different from what it was applied in the Paris Commune. Now, after Lenin's death, there was certainly distortion of application of Marxism on Stalin. This is my belief. Though Stalin did a lot of good things, but he distorted Marxism. The way he applied Marxism, it vulgarized, and it was Mao who applied it creatively in China and made revolution in China in 1949. But in China also, in course of time, the system could not go ahead. And so he tried to save the revolution in the name of the great proletarian cultural revolution. That again the mass rebellion, mass democracy. Mao himself was in power, but he asked and encouraged people to make revolution against himself, against the people in power. I think that was the spirit, revolutionary spirit. But the system, it couldn't be systematized, it couldn't be institutionalized. But after Mao's death, various attempts were made to make revolution, like in Peru, in Philippines, in Turkey, in India, lastly in Nepal. But there were various experiments. So what I mean to say is, there is no one straight line of development of Marxism. Because Marxism is a science, it has to be applied creatively, according to the changing context, you have to apply it. Only then you can make revolution. If you just try to copy it and impose on it, you can't succeed. So in Nepal, we try to be creative, we try to learn the basics of Marxism, follow the basic tenets of Marxism, but try to apply it very creative. That's why within 10 years span, we could, with a big stride, from a small force, we rose as the biggest political force in the country. We mobilized the masses of people. But in a country like Nepal, which is not industrialized, the basic mass of people are the poor peasantry who live in the rural areas. We mobilize them. Then apart from the class issue, which traditional Marxism talked of only of class, but we develop it with only the class factor cannot resolve the problem. We have to take into the non-class issues, gender issue, the caste issue, the nationality issue. These needs to be incorporated into Marxism. Then only you can mobilize the masses and make revolution. That's what we tried in Nepal. So within a span of 10 years, we could mobilize millions of masses of people, and we succeeded to overthrow the autocratic monarchy and start a new era in Nepal, what we're trying to institutionalize right now. So this way, what I am trying to say is, Marxism doesn't have a set format. It has basic tenets which needs to be grasped correctly and applied creatively. So what are the basic things? What are the fundamentals? What are the universal aspects of Marxism? I think there is universality and there is particularity. In this, there is a debate in the communist movement, in the Marxist movement. The one stream just talks of the universal aspects of Marxism, try to take it very dogmatically and apply it dogmatically. And then there is another stream which doesn't talk of universal aspects of Marxism, talks of only of practical or particular aspects of Marxism and gets debated and gets caught in the quagmire of reformism. So these two extremes, two deviations of Marxism are revisionism, we call revisionism or reformism, and the other is dogmatism, left sectarianism. But the real Marxism is to grasp the basic essence of Marxism, universal aspects of Marxism, and apply it creatively to suit your concrete conditions. So, both fighting against revisionism or reformism on the right side and left sectarianism and dogmatism on the left side, you can develop and apply Marxism and make revolution. That's what we have been doing. And talking of the relevance of Marxism in the 21st century, I think 2-3 aspects needs to be considered. I think one aspect is the philosophical aspects of Marxism. Because Lenin, you must all be doing, Lenin says there are 3 component parts of Marxism. One is philosophy, second is political economy, and the third is scientific socialism. Philosophy, economics, and politics. These 3 aspects, there are 3 components of Marxism are there. So I think on these 3 aspects, we need to develop. But talking of philosophy, I am not going into detail, I am not a student of philosophy. So what I say is, philosophy gives you a total picture of the world outlook. It's the way you view things. And the Marxist philosophy of dialectical and historical materialism, which teaches you to see the world in a totality, in a dynamic frame, how the universe originated, how the species originated, how society from very backward, primitive stage developed through stages. Primitive tribal society to a slavery society, and then the feudal society, the capitalist society and socialist society. This gives a coherent picture. I don't see any other system which can explain how the human beings were first created or how first the universe was created. Those various theories, scientific theories are there, Big Bang theories and other theories. But everybody agrees the human species originated from lower species, and I think the human civilization is only about 10,000 years old, and it has been developing through various stages, and all the societies have almost the same history. You see, by the 14th, 15th century, till the 14th, 15th century, if you see the history of the world, almost all the societies were at the same stage of development. Now we see such a vast difference between America, Europe and Asia and Africa. But till the society was at the same level. That means till all the society were at the feudal stage, they were almost at the same stage. But with the advent of capitalism, or backed by industrial revolution, then the huge gap was created. Some society became very advanced, like the Americas and the Europe, and the other societies were left backward. And because of colonialism, when the primitive accumulation was enforced from those societies, Africa and Latin America, and the development was concentrated in Europe and America, there was this huge gap was created. I think this method of understanding the world, understanding history, only the Marxist method of dialectical historical materialism can explain. I don't see any other method which can explain it. I haven't seen any other philosophy. There are various philosophies. I don't want to undermine neo-Kantism, agnosticism, so-called postmodernism. Bits and parts they can explain. But in totality, to understand the whole human history, whole human society, there is no coherent system other than the Marxist system of dialectical historical materialism. That's why this, on the philosophical front, relevance of Marxism is there. Only problem is we have not been able to establish it. I think this area needs to be grasped correctly and developed. That's why in this field of philosophy, there is a relevance of Marxism, and dialectical and historical materialism will remain as the leading force of philosophy in the world. And then the other, on the question of political economy, people talk of crisis, economic crisis, financial crisis, but I don't see any other system which can explain it very coherently. What is the root cause of this crisis? How this society, how this capitalism system developed, and how imperialism developed, and what are the inner contradictions of this system? I think only Marxism, only the Marxist political economy can explain that. Because the capitalism as such is a system which thrives on personal greed and profit motive. And that personal greed and profit motive creates an unequal and uneven development. Some people get rich, some more get poor. Some part of the globe become rich, and the vast part of the globe become poor. That is inherent in the accumulative logic of capitalism. And the so-called globalization we talk of, I think this is just an expansionary drive of capitalism. It was very clearly forecasted in the 1848 Communist Manifesto. Many of our scholars talk of globalization as a new phenomenon. But when I read the Communist Manifesto written in 1848, there are already the forecast is there. Because capitalism cannot be confined to a particular political border. In search of profit, it will expand. It will dismantle all Chinese walls. That's what Marx and Engels said. And that's what's happening. This is the application of Marxism. The so-called globalization is a financial imperialism. This is called globalization. And what disaster is creating, you know it. So, some parts of the world, the whole wealth is centralized. People are filthy rich, and vast humanity is suffering from hunger and deprivation. And this is the result of globalization. This is the capitalist globalization. This is financial globalization. I think this way only Marxism can explain the root cause of this problem. So in the front of political economy, I think the relevance of Marxism is there. And now coming to the question of politics of scientific socialism. There is a big debate on dictatorship of authority, dictatorship. Nobody wants to listen this word dictatorship. It has become a very dirty word. But what is dictatorship? It's just imposition of will of one class, one section of people on the other. Then what is politics? Politics is the same thing. Whether you call it dictatorship or democracy, you are a section of the people impose their will on others. The power, politics, this is all a form of dictatorship. So democracy as being practiced in the world, today's world, it sounds very nice, having elections, periodic elections, people getting elected. But how does it make a difference to the masses of the people? Same group of the ruling classes get elected, in turn they rule and exploit the vast masses of the people. And very democracy for a handful of people, and very dictatorship on the overwhelming majority of the people. This is what exactly Marxism says. As long as there is these classes, a very class society, or the state based on classes, then whatever you may call this system, this will be, as long as the class state remains, there will be dictatorship over the masses of the people, and there will be democracy for a handful of people. I could be making a very scandalous remark. Being a Prime Minister of a country, if I talk this way, many of you, I don't know how many of you friends from the media fraternity are here, it could be very scandalous. But I am talking as an academic. Though I have been elected as a Prime Minister, but I still feel the dictatorship and democracy question needs to be, it has not been resolved. I like to call myself a Democrat. I am a Democrat. But in yes, what about the people, masses of the people? Have they got real fruits of democracy? But I have not been able to do it. I am talking of from the seat of the Prime Minister's chair. If I want to give real democracy to the masses of the people, poor peasantry, poor workers, I can't do it. So that's why what Marxism says is, as long as there is class society, state serves a particular class, it is an instrument of imposing dictatorship over the masses of the working people and providing formal democracy to a few people who rule society. I think this is still applicable. And I see in the field of politics also Marxism is very relevant, and this concept of dictatorship and democracy needs to be debated. But we have to be very critical of the system that was applied in the erstwhile socialist states. I am very critical about it. What democracy, in fact, the communists should have been the most democratic people. Just see the experience of Paris Commune. There the workers, the working class masses of the people directly elected their representatives. They could be recalled back any time. That's what the highest form of democracy practice. But after in Lenin time also, during the Russian Soviet, initially he tried to practice mass democracy, real democracy. But after his death, the type of system developed in the Soviet Union got degenerated, became a very bureaucratic apparatus was created. And in the name of working class, in the name of the toiling masses of the people, few bureaucrats of the party and the state, they started ruling it, and that got degenerated. And I think that's got the proletarian democracy got distorted. And it gave a very bad name. Dictatorship gave a very bad name to the whole socialist project, and now we are very defensive. So I am just, everywhere I have to go, I have to give my credentials. I have very hard to prove my credentials as a Democrat. If I don't Like the we call mantras in the Hindu religion. If I don't give my credential as a Democrat, then I have to be very defensive. I will be attacked as being a autocrat, as a dictator. So why it happened was because they were very wrongly applied in the Soviet Union, and that was copied elsewhere. Nice. Our own understanding in Nepal is we should develop this concept of democracy. We should go back to the models of Paris Commune and the original Soviets as practiced by Lenin, and learn from some of the experiment of mass democracy try to be applied by Mao, and go beyond that. That's why our party made a resolution in 2001. We passed a resolution on development of democracy in the 21st century. There, what we said was, the people, real masses of the people, should have the right to supervise and to intervene in the state affairs. Then only you can have democracy. So that way, friends, in the field of philosophy, in the field of political economy, in the field of scientific socialism, relevance of Marxism is there. But the only thing is the distortion being carried out in the past needs to be corrected and developed further. And that's what we have been trying in Nepal. In Nepal, though, we are in a very difficult stage. We pursued the revolutionary path, but because of the balance of forces, we couldn't complete the revolution. So we had to change our path middle way. So we chose a path of compromise. So what we have been practiced right now is practice a middle path of compromise with a section of the ruling class. We align with the bourgeois forces, capitalist forces, to fight against the autocratic monarchy, throw away the monarchy, and we have aligned with the bourgeois class. So now that there is a competition going on for the supremacy over the state. So that's why in the last 3 years that I changed the government, though our party, Maoist party, emerged as the largest party. So we were not allowed to lead the government. But 2 years we kept out of power. Only last month we managed to cobble up a coalition and form the government, but still challenges are there. The people are not very happy, both inside and outside. Being Maoist, leading a government is not a happy scene for them. But still, we are trying to creatively apply Marxism in Nepal. And I believe if we stick to the basic tenets of Marxism, universal truth of Marxism, and try to creatively apply in our concrete condition, and we will succeed. I am very confident the type of crisis going on worldwide, created by so-called globalization, it will soon give rise to another wave of revolution. Nobody can stop that. Of course, revolution cannot be repeated. It won't repeat like the Soviet revolution or the Chinese revolution. But revolution will be there. The path of revolution, mode of revolution, we'll have to find ourselves. But I see by the end of this century, we'll have another wave of revolution, and mankind will be liberated, and all the issues of gender, caste, operationality, if they are addressed correctly, Marxism will be triumphant. As great Rosa Luxemburg said, either socialism or barbarism. We have to choose it. And I am for socialism. We should choose socialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for a very rich and very thought-provoking comment. I'm sure we will have a wonderful discussion ahead of us. Now, I would like to invite the discussants to join at the podium, and in the meantime, my colleagues will collect the questions. Please give them the questions. I'm Ashok Gurum, Senior Director of India-China Institute at the New School. It is my great privilege and honor to welcome Honorable Prime Minister of Nepal, Dr. Baburam Bhattrai, Honorable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Narayan Kaji Shrestha, Honorable Member of Parliament, Istila Yami, and their delegation to this august gathering. I'm also pleased to welcome our President, David Van Zandt, and our distinguished panel of discussants, Professor Andrew Arato of the New School, Professor Partho Chatterjee from Columbia University, Dr. Mary Deshan from Washington University of St. Louis, and Professor Sanjay Reddy from the New School. I see some old friends as well as a number of new people in the audience. I welcome all of you and thank you for joining us on such a short notice. During a recent visit to Nepal, I had the privilege of meeting with Dr. Baburam Bhattrai. We talked about him visiting us at the New School, not only as a political leader, but also as a scholar. I'm grateful that he has taken time out from his busy schedule with the UN General Assembly sessions to be here with us today. In a few minutes, our President, David Van Zandt, will formally introduce Dr. Bhattrai. However, I want to congratulate Dr. Bhattrai for taking office as the 4th Prime Minister of Nepal since the first Constituent Assembly election in April of 2008. The fact that there have been 4 Prime Ministers in just over 3 years says a lot about highly turbulent and contested period of Nepali politics. As a newly elected Prime Minister, Dr. Bhattrai faces the twin challenges of overseeing the completion of Nepal's transition from war to peace and the restructuring of state as a federal democratic republic. This requires the reintegration of the People's Liberation Army with the Nepali Army and the drafting of a new constitution. In the midst of growing frustration with the political stalemate, the compulsion and necessity for political compromise is greatest, and something that all Nepalis want you, Mr. Prime Minister, to pursue. However, I believe that the biggest challenge faced by you is not how you effectively facilitate compromise between the major political parties and the elites, but to make sure that the aspirations and the needs of marginalized communities such as Dalits, indigenous people, Madhesis, and women, which comprise of about 80% of Nepal's population, are adequately accounted for in the writing of the new constitution. Historically, it has been a very small group of people who have controlled the power and wealth and have been in position to bring about change. Yet, they have had no intention, no motivation to actually bring about a serious, meaningful change so that Nepali state can ensure that every single Nepali citizen has access to equal opportunities to live life to its fullest potential. Today, Nepali people demonstrate increased levels of apathy towards politicians, yet you are one of a handful of leaders, if not the only one, who is still highly respected and therefore Nepal's best bet for a secure future. We wish you the very best, sir, in your efforts to help establish the critical framework that is the new federal democratic constitution, which will allow people to build an inclusive democracy in Nepal. Before I request President Van Zandt to formally welcome and introduce Dr. Bhattrai, let me outline briefly the format of today's program. We will start with welcome remarks and an introduction by the President. While the Prime Minister comes to the podium and before he begins, I'll request Kevin Bobrowski to kindly come, Kevin is sitting there, and present his wonderful new book, Maowali, to the Prime Minister and the President of the new school, and to say some brief remarks about his book. The Prime Minister will then speak for about 40 minutes on today's topic, what is the relevance of Marxism in the 21st century, the Nepali experience. This will be followed by discussion session where each of our discussants has 4 minutes to share their thoughts, comments, and a question for the Prime Minister. Due to time constraints, I thank our distinguished panel, Andrew Arato, Parthu Chatterjee, Mary Deshin, and Sanjay Reddy in advance for sharing with us their rich knowledge and scholarship on the subject, and for doing it in a way that enhances our understanding of the issues in just 4 minutes. Given the enormity of the topic for academics that can speak for hours, requesting them to briefly comment and pose a question is an impossible proposition. However, I'm grateful that they have accepted the challenge. Since time is limited, I won't be able to present them individually. The program agenda includes a bio of each discussant. We have a designated timekeeper, Shen, a PhD student, who looks very nice but is very tough. He will let you know when the time is up. Then, Dr. Bhattrai will have 10 minutes to respond to the discussants, which will leave us with about 30 to 40 minutes for a general Q&A session with the audience. In order to manage with the limited time we have had and to get the maximum number of questions out, a question card has been given to every member of the audience for you to write down your question. We request that you restrict yourself to one question and include your name and affiliation on the card. The cards will be collected immediately after Dr. Bhattrai's talk. Professor Susan Hangen of Ramappa College, Professor Susan Hangen, can you raise your hand? And Professor Sarah Snyderman of Yale University, both of whom have deep knowledge of Nepal, have kindly agreed to quickly sort through the questions and then pose a set of 4 to 5 questions to Dr. Bhattrai. In addition, thanks to technology and my tech-savvy student team, I'm pleased to welcome all the people who will be participating in today's program via live streaming and encourage them to pose questions to the Prime Minister through the India-China Institute's Facebook and Twitter pages. Special thanks to Professor Kathy March, who I know is connected via internet, a scholar intimately involved in Nepal, who will be joining us along with 30 or so of her students and colleagues from Cornell University. Similarly, I understand people from other locations in the US, Nepal, and Europe will be participating in the event today. Carrie James, where are you? They're sitting outside. Carrie James, Kaushal Shrestha, and Katie Fay. All students at the new school will monitor the connections and conversations on the computers, and my new colleague, Georgina Drew. Where is Gina? Georgina Drew, ICI scholar and professor at the new school, will sort and select a set of questions to pose to Dr. Bhattrai. Many have helped to put together this event in this short span of time, and I wish to thank all of them for their support. I thank the ICI, India-China Institute team, in particular Ryan, Kashish, Katie, Karthik, Brenna, Kaushal, Grace, Sid, and others at the new school who really helped and worked very hard to organize this event. I would also like to thank all our co-sponsors, Adhikar, America-Nepal Friendship Society, Association of Nepali Tarayan in America, Graduate Program in International Affairs, Global Studies at the New School, NRN, National Coordination Council of USA, and the Gurung Society. Last, but by no means the least, a very special thank you to President Van Jen for his enthusiastic support and for rearranging his demanding schedule to first welcome the President of Ecuador in the morning and now the Prime Minister of Nepal.
My great honor to welcome and introduce Dr. Baburam Bhattrai, the Prime Minister of Nepal. I would also like to acknowledge and welcome members of the Prime Minister's delegation. Ashok introduced a minute ago, or your Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, and the Ambassador to Nepal, to the UN. Dr. Bhattrai was elected Prime Minister of Nepal in August 2011. We are fortunate to have the opportunity to welcome him so early in his tenure, coinciding with his participation in the UN General Assembly meeting. He's addressed the UN, reiterating his commitment as a key architect of the 2006 Peace Accord to bring Nepal's peace process to a logical conclusion and the drafting of a new constitution. The doctor is the Maoist Party's vice chairman and is considered one of the principal strategists of the party. The Prime Minister is a prolific writer, authoring several books and essays on the role of Marxism in current global affairs, and specifically within Nepal's modern socio-political context. Prior to his election as Prime Minister, he served from 2008 to 2009 as Nepal's Finance Minister. Though he served in this position for only a short period of time, he is regarded as one of the most successful finance ministers in Nepal. The Prime Minister received his PhD in developmental economics from the Nehru University in 1986, a university which shares a tradition of critical analysis and study much like the New School. Mr. Prime Minister, under your leadership, there's been a clear commitment to issues of social justice and intellectual inquiry similar to the ethos of the New School. While some may have disagreements with your approach, your dedication to issues of social justice, particularly in regard to marginalized groups in Nepal, is undeniable. Such issues are precisely what we here at the New School are committed to. The New School community also has a special interest in connection to Nepal through the India-China Institute, the Graduate Program International Affairs, and its International Field Program. Over the past 5 years, teams of graduate students have conducted fieldwork in Nepal, observing and studying the democratic transitions underway. The India-China Institute has also hosted a series of events on Nepal's political discourse, including hosting a historic major public event with the first Maoist Prime Minister of Nepal, Prachanda, in 2008. Well, this afternoon's program and visit is therefore the continuation of that ongoing dialogue. Today's event will offer a unique platform for the Prime Minister to discuss his scholarly work and its impact on his vision for Nepal, and present an opportunity to engage in conversation with fellow scholars. I'm looking forward to today's talk and conversation, so everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Baburam Bhattrai, Prime Minister of Nepal.
Well, now I would like to invite Kevin to present.
In 1975. For 3 years, as a remote areas water system engineer and overseer, I learned firsthand about the basic human needs of the villagers with whom I lived in Nepal. It's a great pleasure to present to the Prime Minister of Nepal, Dr. Bhattrai, and the New School President, Dr. Van Zandt, copies of my new book, Mao Body. May the many portraits of the Maoist combatants in the book remind us all of Nepal's recent history and the promise for the future. Thank you.
And I think that it is only just and it's only just and right that your party is now again and you yourself have the responsibility as Prime Minister. The last time we did one of these things with Chairman Dahal Prachanda, then Prime Minister, exactly 3 years ago, someone in the audience asked him why the CPN Maoist has 4 dead white and 1 dead Chinese man on his banners and posters. His response was, do not Americans have 5 dead white men, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Lincoln, and perhaps Roosevelt, on their banners? This is a clever response, but it did not call for what should have been the rejoinders. Why not Rosa Luxemburg and Edward Bernstein instead of Stalin and Mao? Or why not replace the latter two with Nikolai Bukharin and perhaps some other Chinese leader. I think today you took Stalin off the banner. I don't know if you've done it before, but I think that was, for me, important. I come from that part of the world which was under Stalinist systems, and the fact that you're able to do that is positive. So the question, which Marxism, which was one of my first questions, I think you have an important extent answer. But I have a second question, and that is whether any Marxism, even as you defined it today, is not misleading and problematic in relationship to the current political problems that you face, specifically the process of constitution making. Let me address this issue just very briefly myself, watching the time. You very well know that of the Marxist greats, only Marx in 1848 and Lenin in 1905 and 1917 dealt with problems of constitution making and constituent assemblies. And they argued that without requisite state power, constitutions cannot be made. This was right and important also in my view. But as you did today, they also saw this power as ultimately all state power in terms of dictatorship. In terms of a dictatorship. And I'd like to point out that there are two meanings of dictatorship that are at stake here. One meaning is the one you gave today, that all states in class societies are in fact dictatorships. And that would go even for the commune model that you use. But there's another meaning of dictatorship, and that meaning is specifically a form of government without separation of powers, without checks and balances, without fundamental rights, without judicial independence. We know this meaning too. I'm sure you're aware of that meaning. The question to me is not whether philosophically you will regard the state, any state, as a dictatorship. That's a matter of definition and analysis from a very abstract point of view. What matters to me is what is your relationship to the second meaning of dictatorship? In other words, a government without separation of powers, without checks and balances, without judicial independence, without fundamental rights, and so on. That, I think, is an important question given what you're facing now, because you have to make a constitution. Now, you didn't come to power, whatever you might say, by a revolution. You came to power after multi-party agreements, after making an interim constitution, a constitutionalist constitution, your current constitution, and then free elections. I think they were extremely free, these elections, in which your party got 30% of the roll vote and 38% of the seats. You did not become the majority party of Nepal. And 30% is a significant part of the electorate, but it is only something less than a third. The experience in most countries where leftist parties play such an important role in state formation as you are now, is that it is during the first few elections that the highest vote is achieved. I think Chairman Prachanda and you feel somehow that successful governance will lead to much to be basically, historically, in comparison to other places, an illusion. So what are you going to do? You're reaching the stage, the first stage, which you call a bourgeois republic, which after Lenin in 1905, you accept now. But how are you going to get to the second stage on the basis of something that will remain inevitably a minoritarian form of power? Thank you.
Because that is in some ways a central part of what you said. Let me say that actually I am in very broad sympathy with the fundamental critique that you make of modern democracy everywhere. Because I too believe that in fact modern democracies today are everywhere oligarchies of property and expertise. Now oligarchy of property is a class concept. Expertise is a little more difficult to define, But regardless, I think there is a very serious argument to be made that democracies in fact reproduce these class divisions. But I want to ask a more specific question in relation to Nepal today and your situation. We all know that your party and the broad popular movement that it represents is now in a position to play a very big role in defining the future of Nepal. Nobody can ignore the presence of your party and the force that you represent. But it has come to this position because of a very long armed struggle that it fought over the last several years. Without that armed struggle, it would not have reached this position. So my question is, let me ask this quite sharply. Do you believe that the present parliamentary system and whatever tentative constitutional forms there are actually a protection for the various freedoms and rights that the people have now gained? Or do you think that they might actually become opportunities for the older monarchical elites and the privileged people to actually push back on those gains and regain some of their earlier privileges? That, I think, is a question that interests a great deal of us, of those who watch Nepal today, and I would certainly like you to respond to that situation. Second is a question that, how much do I have left? 1 minute. Okay, good enough. Second is I'm following up on a remark that Ashok Gurung made in his introduction, which is the question, and you touched upon it, when you mentioned the question of non-class elements in Nepali society, the question of gender, the question of caste, the question of religious and linguistic minorities. My question is, what is a Marxist approach, probably a distinctly Nepali Marxist approach, that you might have in trying to resolve some of these questions? Because these questions have emerged in many other countries too. But what is your specific approach in resolving the questions that are posed by these non-class elements?
Though there was a certain kind of somber hopefulness, I think, in the world, where even conservatives were talking in favor of regulation and of control of global finance capital. And liberals were joining in and predicting, if not actually advocating, its demise. Today, just a few years later, it's rather hard to remember that, in the face of an even further consolidation and intensification of its global hegemony, those conservative and liberal fellow travelers have mainly returned to the more familiar roles that they have held as perpetuators or witting and unwitting abettors of financialization, supporting the continued expansion of financial capital, even into every possible relationship and process of society and of nature. Marxists, I would say, my understanding of Western Marxists, which I will say is limited, have also returned to familiar analyses and roles. Dilettante Marxism discovers bright signs of the imminent demise of capitalism in even the smallest rearguard actions anywhere in the world. Neo-Marxisms, bereft of a positive program of action, have returned to preaching accommodation. And what I'll call here unqualified Marxism, and critics would call unreformed Marxism, continue to make analyses of capitalism that demand a practical action directed at its systematic transformation over the long run. And even that, I think, in the West, and I think as Dr. Bhattrai was also saying, remains largely a theoretical stance. So I want to say that you have before you today, as I think he's made evident, a rather rare kind of person. You have before you a practicing Marxist in these senses. Rare still in today's world. His party currently holds an electoral plurality and has sent him to serve as his country's head of government. In striking contrast, and follow me here on my version of the United States, here in the United States, the most effective practical application of a Marxist analysis to finance capital is being led by the likes of the Koch brothers. That's the K-O-C-H, Koch brothers, not C-O-K-E. And as the audience here will be well aware, this transformation is destroying even the industrial capitalism that it purports to promote, to say nothing of human communities and of the biosphere. The conversation that's being attempted here today thus takes place, I want to say, across not merely theoretical divides, but among people who are very differently positioned with respect to these worldwide struggles against the hegemony of global finance capital. Since an adequate critique must also be global in its scope, I take this as a very important effort, but my own experience is it's a very difficult effort. In the remainder of my comments, I want to say just one or two things, adding to Dr. Bhattrai's comments about Nepal's experience. When the West comes peddling its wares in Nepal, which it does constantly, in the form of development packages, in the form of good governance action plans, and even lately ready-made constitutions, the Marxist module is always left out. But not by chance. Nepal is self-sufficient and self-sustaining in this regard. In Nepal, it has been Marxist analyses that have proven capable of moving beyond description to explanation of persistent socioeconomic inequalities and of Nepal's position in the global economy. Those analyses have not just been, I want to emphasize here, those analyses have not just been joined to active political struggle, they're emergent from it. And this is not to say that Nepal's Marxists hold all the keys to transformation that actually exist in capitalism. Far from it. But they are grappling with developing mechanisms for such transformations in a more practical mode than in most places in the world. Now, being out of time, I'll turn to my question to Dr. Bhattrai. In Nepal, Dr. Bhattrai's party has talked about, when they came into the peace process, they were talking about real peace. They were talking about sustainable peace, but their term was really real peace, which they were saying would involve not merely things like army integration, but real sovereignty, which would include, and financial sovereignty, and real democracy, which Dr. Bhattrai himself was talking about here today. Form of a state and mechanisms in which the majority would have the power to supervise and intervene in the state. With Nepal, and I now come directly to my question, with Nepal now posed for, almost inevitably, for very rapid capitalist development of one type or another, I would ask you to talk about the kinds of conditions that your representatives in the Constituent Assembly are trying to set in the Constitution such that these things, real sovereignty and real democracy, can be achieved to some extent, particularly in state restructuring and forms of government debate. Thank you.
Ashok, Your Excellency, Mr. Prime Minister, Dr. Bhattrai, and perhaps you have many other titles. Of all of the titles I've mentioned, I feel the most appropriate here is the last, and indeed that is how my other colleagues, co-panelists, have been addressing you. I'm reminded of the story of the Phalangist general who broke in the middle of a lecture by a left-wing professor of philosophy, I think at the University of Salamanca during the Spanish Civil War. And it was the general who was beaten back, since the professor insisted that the general had no privileges in that classroom. at least until the end of the lecture, at which point the professor was duly arrested. Happily, Dr. Bhattrai has generously spoken here as an academic by his own description. Perhaps a lapsed academic or a returning academic, but nevertheless as an academic, and not only as an activist and as a politician, which he, of course, also is, and a very distinguished one. The career of Marxism in the world is, of course, the foremost, perhaps, certainly one of the foremost examples of the effect of ideas in the world, and of the effect of ideas on history. But of course, there's also another direction. The world also affects ideas, and history does, or should, affect the ideas which we hold to. Dr. Bhattrai spoke of Marxism as being scientific. And of course, at the very heart of the idea of being scientific is the idea of learning from evidence and from experience, and of shaping one's ideas in light of evidence and experience. How exactly should we learn from the experience of the 20th century with respect to those societies which, to use Professor or Dr. Bhattarai's very well-chosen words, trace their origins and their inspiration to Marx? That perhaps is a better description of those societies than as existing socialist societies or some of the other phrases which we sometimes use. It is not very difficult, upon inquiring into the particular histories of those societies, as all of you know, to very quickly discover that their failures were multiple. And of course, they are not the only societies which have had failures, and I do not mean to suggest that. Their failures were, of course, political, but they were also social and economic. And these different dimensions of their failure were intertwined. Although the metaphor of distortion, which Dr. Bhattrai used, seems perhaps helpful at first, one suspects that it does not go far enough. There are certain historical moments when what one might call a bias toward inclusion, in particular a bias toward economic and social inclusion, is clearly in the interest of national development. China in 1949 was, I think it's reasonable to suggest, an example of a society in which this was the case. And it was for that reason that the revolution in China, communist revolution in China, laid the foundation through social reforms and economic investments of various kinds, arguably, in China's subsequent economic trajectory. It is not very difficult to argue that Nepal too is in a similar situation today, in which a bias toward inclusion, economic and social inclusion, is in the interest of national development. But this observation brings me to my question. In what ways is the prescription of your party, Dr. Bhattrai, and of Marxists, or those who seek their inspiration from Marx generally, different from the prescription of a more general category of political actors, whom we might call leftist Democrats, concerned with inclusivity, who of course come in many different stripes? On what specific issues of economic policy, and in what ways, does your prescription differ from theirs? And how would you trace that difference to specifically Marxist inspiration? In an interview which you gave, you spoke favorably of those capitalists who have national characteristics and who are oriented toward productivity, as opposed to international capitalists oriented toward rentier, short-term rentier gains. That would be an example of a distinction which it would seem would be relevant to both categories of political actors. So please, if you could, illuminate for us in what particular ways a Marxist analysis will make a difference in the detailed conduct of the economic policy of Nepal, thereby enabling it to avoid some of the mistakes of those other states and societies which, in not too distant past, have sought inspiration from Marx. Thank you.
I want to thank all the panelists for great questions and great comments. So now I would like to invite Mr. Prime Minister, Dr. Baburam Bhattrai, to take about 10 minutes, which is again not fair, but now within 10 minutes if you can try to respond to some of the questions. From there, yes, please stay there.
Thank you. You made some very distinct and interesting observations and comments. I have no reason to disagree with you on many of the issues you have raised. I didn't dwell much upon our concrete experiences in Nepal. Maybe that's why I couldn't convey more about it and couldn't clarify myself. About the query of Mr. Andrew Arato, the question of making the new constitution, how Marxism will be addressed. Because generally people ask, though the demand of Constituent Assembly was raised by Marx and Engels, it was never realized in their lifetime. In Lenin's lifetime he also raised this question, but the electric Constituent Assembly was dissolved after the Soviet Revolution. And since then, no Constituent Assembly election has taken place under the communist leadership. So I think we are the only communist in Nepal who put the political demand of Constituent Assembly at the center of our movement and ultimately realized, and we emerged as the largest party in the Constituent Assembly. Now, if it had been the direct election, then we are not only the largest but the majority party. We have a mixed electoral system in Nepal. 40% is the direct election, first past the post system. In that, out of 240 seats, we won 124. That is a simple, absolute majority. But in the next 60% or 360 seats, it was the proportional representation, so we got only about largest, we emerged as the largest group, we didn't get the majority. I think nowhere else in the world, in the proportional system, you get a majority. So in that sense, in the Constituent Assembly, we are the single largest force and we are trying to make the constitution through the Constituent Assembly. How does it fit in with the Marxist project? But we think it fits in. Because here lies the basic credential of communists, whether they are Democrats or not. We believe in democracy. We believe in the representative institutions. The only thing is, our critique with the bourgeois democracy is, it is a equal competition among the unequals. Given the inherent economic and social inequality, you talk of political equality. There is the contradiction. We have only reservation on that. That doesn't mean we are against electoral system or representative democracy. So in Nepal's case, though since it was a transitional period, old monarchical system was gone and new system was not institutionalized. So in the interim period, we could mobilize the masses of the people and win over the conference, and the election was free and fair. So we are fully committed to the Constituent Assembly and we are committed to making a democratic constitution through the Constituent Assembly. But this constitution won't be a socialist constitution. So there is the difference. It will be a bourgeois democratic constitution. So because in Nepal we feel this stage of revolution is a bourgeois democratic revolutionary phase, not a socialist phase. So that's why we are committed to constitution making and we will make the constitution. It fully fits in with the Marxist project. And the question, how we will go to the next stage, that is a problematic. After the completion of the bourgeois democratic revolution, how will it transit to the socialist phase, as that yet to be seen. We are not bothered because it will take several years or decades to institutionalize and develop bourgeois democracy or the capitalist system in Nepal. So we'll think about it. So please don't force me to forecast that. I think we have enough time to think about it. And about Arthur Chatterjee's query, without amnestical we won't have this stage. That's very correct. So we have never denounced the armed struggle. We did very correctly. Without the 10 years of armed struggle, the autocratic monarchy wouldn't have thrown out. So we wouldn't have been able to arouse the poor masses of the people throughout the country. We had encouraged them to raise arms against that autocratic system. So we are never apologetic about it. The only thing is, after reaching a certain stage, then we thought, now this is now time to stop the armed struggle and move along a peaceful path. So this depends on the stage of development of revolution. So now how do we protect our gains? The question is there. There are serious questions being asked from our revolutionary comrades, but we believe, given the power equation in Nepal, we can preserve the gains of revolution and move ahead. If there is an armed backlash against us, then we will have to think. But as of now, we believe, given the concrete reality of Nepal, after the monarchy is gone and the old army which were loyal to the monarchy is itself in the process of democratization. So if we really manage to mobilize the masses of the people to win over the progressive section of the armed forces and the other people working for the whole state, I think we can build up a fairly strong coalition which can preserve the gains and move ahead. So dangers are there, but we believe in Nepal's specific case, we can preserve these gains and move ahead. And about the non-class factors, I think I have already spoken. Because we gave enough attention to non-class factors, we could expand our base and reach this stage. And about meditations about the question of financial capital and these things, I fully agree with her. That the crisis of financial capital cannot be resolved within the imperialist system. So this is a broader issue. Right now in Nepal, since we are just in a stage of developing progressive industrial capitalism, our fight is not directly against industrial capital, but our fight is against monopoly capital, against the international imperialist capital. But for that we can't fight alone. We need solidarity with the movement elsewhere. That's why in Nepal, if we have to preserve our revolution, we need to collaborate, coordinate with the progressive anti-imperialist forces worldwide. And it's Sanjay Reddy's query, how different from left Democrats, what's our economic policy? Because our stage, the stage of revolution in Nepal is a bourgeois democratic stage. Our basic economic policy is to do away with all the feudal remnants, to abolish all the feudal production relations in the agriculture sector and do away with all the monopolistic features in the other sectors and to defend and protect national capital, productive capital, so that there is a fairly well-developed industrial base within the country, the creation of a proletarian class, and which will create a basis for moving towards socialism. So this phase of revolution in Nepal is development of an industrial, productive capital phase. So our economic policy will be basically focused on that. So that's why our main issue has been to bring about a progressive revolutionary land reform based on the slogan of land to the tillers, to do away with all the feudal production relations in agriculture, protect the national capital, industrialize the economy, create a big industrial base, create a strong proletarian class, and then prepare for transition towards socialism. So I think this should fundamentally differ from the policy of other bourgeois democrats elsewhere, because they want to ally with the imperialist capital. In our case, we don't want to ally the increased capital, though we are forced to selectively allow foreign direct investment and invite even the imperialist capital, but that will be on a selective basis, which won't harm our independent development of industrial capital within the country. So this way I think we can complete the bourgeois democratic revolution in Nepal and then prepare the base for moving towards socialism and communism. Thank you.
Your next steps to safely integrate the Maoist army and to overcome the internal problems of your party, United Communist Party of Nepal Maoist. Next, we have via Twitter, Kyle Knight, who is a Kathmandu-based Fulbright Fellow. He asks, when will Dr. Baburam Bhattrai keep the promise and issue a direction regarding the 2007 Supreme Court decision and give citizenship IDs that list a third gender option? This was also asked by someone on the floor, Prerna Sampath. Finally, via Facebook, Kathy March of Cornell and Tribhuvan University asked the following. In 1990, speaking at Cornell, just after the then new constitution had been drafted, you said that the hopes of hundreds of thousands of people who took part in the street demonstrations needed to be addressed on two fronts. Number one, the democratization of the political process, and number two, economic reform to lift people, mostly rural peasants, women, elites, and ethnic nationalities out of poverty. You said then that the focus was too much on the political, including all the parties and professional politicians, and not enough on the economic situation of ordinary people. Do you think this has changed? How specifically have you adapted your Marxism to address not only the economic vulnerability of peasants, but also that of women, elites, and ethnic nationalities?
Thank you. Dr. Bhattrai.
Question of integration of the PLA. In the comprehensive peace agreement we signed in 2006, there is a clear provision of integration and rehabilitation of the PLA cadres within the security forces and then democratization of the whole army. So these are the two provisions. Unfortunately, the question of democratization of the whole army has been put in the back burner, and people just talk of integration of the PLA. So still we are trying to reach a consensus on the modality of integration. Those who want to leave the jobs in the security forces and go to political activity or lead a social life, they can voluntarily choose, and they will be given an economic package and go for rehabilitation. And those who want to join the security forces will remain and they will be integrated appropriately. So this way, now we are in the stage of giving choices to them, regroup them, and then integrate. And the exact modality of integration, the exact numbers to be integrated is yet to be worked out. I think soon we should be able to sort it out. And about the question of citizenship to ID to third genders, we have in principle agreed will provide citizenship. Even our Supreme Court has given a ruling in that context. So the government is committed to implement that. The third gender will be treated on an equal basis with other genders, and they will be given full citizenship rights and all the facilities. And about the question of economic issue, of course the democratization, all the question of political democracy and economic development, they are the two fundamental issues. Though now we are more occupied with completion of the political process, completion of the peace process and making the new constitution. But ultimately we will have to address the economic issues. Until unless we bring about a radical reform in the socio-economic sphere to eradicate poverty, provide employment within the country and bring out a balanced development of different regions, we can't have a sustainable peace in the country. So our focus next would be on economic development. But right now, since there is political instability, we have to first complete this process, and our next focus should be definitely on economic development, and we are very clear on this issue. Thank you.
From the floor, so we have tried to group them, and so that we can have as many topics discussed as possible. First, following on to the last answer you gave, how has Nepal's caste system influenced your practical application of Marxism in Nepal? And secondly, in relation to that, you have agreed to creating states on the basis of ethnicity. How will this affect your explanation and application of Marxism? A further question, how do you see the role of the Chinese government in the region? And another question on international relations, but from the other direction. What lessons can Nepal learn from the experiences of the communist parties in West Bengal and elsewhere in India? Finally, there have been calls for transitional justice in Nepal in some form, perhaps through a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. You've called instead for full amnesty for wartime crimes. Why has your party taken this decision, and how does it contribute to long-term peace? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Factor has been factored in our revolutionary program, because especially in the case of South Asia, the caste system has been so well entrenched in society. So this is another form of a class distinction. Originally they were the laboring class. Those people who were so-called untouchable or the lower caste, historically they were the working class, the laboring people. So this is, in our view, another form of a class question. So it needs to be dealt separately and factored into the overall class perspective. That's why we have consistently raised this issue and been able to mobilize a large section of people of the so-called untouchable or Dalit caste, and even in the Constituent Assembly they have a very fairly well representation. In our political program, even in the new constitution, the special rights for the Dalits will be enshrined. So this way, we want to liberate them from the age-old oppression of the caste system. And on the question of creation of state on basis of ethnicity is not on the basis of ethnicity alone, because of the wording Jatiya was used for nationality. In Nepali, Jatiya means ethnicity, caste, as well as nationality. So what we meant was it's a nationality. Nationality means a group of people who have a common language, common territory, common economic basis and common psychological makeup. So that group of people we identify as nationality, and we are trying to create a federal state on the basis of nationality, not on ethnicity alone. I think there has been confusion, but instead of ethnicity, we have to use the word ethnicity, then it will be clear. And the role of the Chinese, I think, has been highly exaggerated. China and India are our big neighbors. So historically, we have had a very balanced relation with both of our neighbors, and in recent decades, both our neighbors are developing in a very fast pace. China has already become the second largest economy and rapidly heading towards becoming a superpower by the end of the century. So naturally, China would have its interest on this side of the Himalayas, and India historically has been a big regional power, and it also would have its say on this part of the Himalayas. So there is a contention between these two powers, but our policy has been to maintain a strict neutrality, have a balanced relation with the both. So this big high-powered increasing Chinese influence in Nepal is not correct. So our party or our government, in fact on this issue, all the parties in Nepal have a common understanding. We are bound to have a balanced relation with both of our neighbors. We can't tilt on any side. And on the question of West Bengal experience, I think it was slightly different. West Bengal communists operated within the given parliamentary framework. So there was a limitation beyond which they couldn't go. So after ruling, after being in the government for last 35 years, they were voted out. So since they were operating within the parliamentary system, that is bound to happen. But in our case, it is different. We are not operating within the parliamentary system. We revolted against the old system, and now we are trying to institutionalize a new system through the Constituent Assembly, which is not a parliamentary system. So there is a basic difference. So there can't be any comparison between us and the communist in West Bengal. And the question of transitional justice, we are very conscious that we are about to form two commissions, Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Commission to look after cases of the separate ones. After that, will administer justice accordingly. So we have no policy to give amnesty, blank amnesty to everybody. And there has been misreporting in the press, there has been confusion. So what we mean to say is, according to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, the political cases imposed by political leaders and cadres during the insurgency, they are to be given amnesty. Not all the cases or not to all the criminals. So this needs to be differentiated. So we have no policy of giving amnesty to the criminals or criminal cases. Only the political cases imposed against the political leaders will be restored, not all the cases. Thank you.
Again, a series of questions on different topics, and there have been multiple questions on each of these. First of all, can you provide specific examples of what you mean by the creative application of Marxism in the context of Nepal? Second, you talked of peasants as agent of struggle in Nepal. How do you envision the role of peasantry in Nepal's transformation? On another topic, how can you improve Nepal's economy other than by promoting capitalism and by participating in the global economy? There are a number of questions emerged on the topic of Tibet. This one states, China's growing influence in Nepal has resulted in a Nepali government crackdown against Nepal's 50-year-old Tibetan community. Will your government respect the human rights of this important community? And finally, a question on Nepali diaspora. Nepali youth are leaving Nepal at an alarming rate for opportunities abroad. What are your thoughts on how to bring this enormous talent back home?
Application of Marxism, I mean, you have to defend the basic tenets of Marxism, which is in the form of philosophy, political economy, and scientific socialism as defined by great thinkers. But you have to apply according to the concrete condition. That means the path of revolution to be chosen depends on the class forces within the country. The strategy and tactics of revolution cannot be copied from elsewhere. Like the Soviet model was not copied in China, and Chinese model was not copied in Cuba. So that in that sense, the strategy and tactics of making revolution should be developed according to the concrete situation of the country. That's what we mean by creative application of Marxism, apart from other factors. And the role of peasantry is very important in our case, especially in most of the underdeveloped countries where there is no industrial economy and there is no industrial proletariat. Basic masses of the people, basic working people belong to the peasantry, poor peasantry. So they have to do the role of the proletariat of the Western European and Americas. So the peasantry, we take it as the most revolutionary class, try to organize them, and they have played a very important role in our revolutions. You can see any example in China, Vietnam or elsewhere. So in case of Nepal also, the peasantry plays a very revolutionary role. And because there is no big industrial proletariat, the peasantry has to take that place. So we have analyzed it this way and it has proven correct. How to improve the economy without following the capitalist path? But we think that though there has been a debate in the international Marxist community whether during the Soviet era, whether it was really possible to jump over the capitalist phase and go straight or to socialism. But personally, I was never comfortable with that formulation because according to historical materialism, according to historical experiences, you have to go over to socialism. So you have to have an industrial base. Without industrial proletariat or industrial capitalism, you can't have a basis for socialism. So you can't just skip over the capitalist phase. Only thing is, we can't follow the traditional path followed by Europe or America. So our capitalism will be more national productive capitalism oriented towards socialism. So that will be the basic difference. Otherwise, we can't fully skip over the capitalist phase. So this could be debated, but our firm belief is we have to first develop capitalism and then go towards socialism. On the question of Tibetan issue and crackdown on refugees, that is not true. As in, there is some misreporting and misconception of our government changing that policy of Tibetan refugees coming to Nepal, not being allowed to remain as refugees and they being forcibly handed over to China. That is not true. If they are genuine refugees, then they will be given the refugee status and will be handed over to the UN agencies. But if there are some people who are not really refugees and want to go back to China, they can choose and they can go back to China. But we have no policy to forcibly send the refugees to China, and we haven't done. Let there be no confusion on it. And about drawing our talents back home, this has been the most pressing issue. And for me personally, it hurts me a lot. A poor country like us to develop, we need human capital. Human capital is the most precious material for development. If we have our young people, educated people, leaving the country and going away and settling elsewhere, this is a huge drag on our development. So the government is fully committed to providing opportunities for our young talents to remain in the country or go back to the country and contribute for the development. For this I am fully committed and I will do my best to create such a condition for a revolutionary practice. So there is a dialectical interrelation between theory and practice. So we are fully committed, in fact fully grasp the importance of theory, and that's what we have applied in practice. As Karl Marx famously stated, the philosophers have interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. The question of theory is there, but it has to be applied to change the world. So theory and practice are interrelated, and we fully grasp it, and we are committed to maintain that dialectical unity. And that is the secret behind the development of a Marxist movement in Nepal, and we continue to follow this relation between theory and practice. Thank you.
Those who are staying up in Afghanistan or Italy or at Cornell for participating in this very important debate, part of being in academia and part of having this opportunity is to really critically think. So you have, by coming here, Mr. Prime Minister, you have given us a great opportunity. I would request everyone to be seated until the Prime Minister leaves the room. And this is what the security people have asked me to do. So please be seated, and I just want to thank the Prime Minister and his delegation for a wonderful time with us. Thank you.